This program was made possible by the law firm of Zalman and Schnorman, whose practice is limited to personal injury and insurance law. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Schnorman. Mr. Schnorman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Schnorman.
Welcome to Lawline. The tragedy of the mass suicides by the members of the Heaven's Gate cult raises many questions as to what the government can or cannot do to restrict or monitor these groups. Today we'll find out more about this issue with Arnold Markowitz, director of the Cult Hotline and Clinic for the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services. We'll also meet Lori Schaffler. Lori was a member of the Hare Krishna cult for 9 years, and we'll find out how she got out with her 3 children. Hello, Arnie. Hello, Lori.
Hi there.
Hi.
Arnie, how would you define cult? What is a cult?
Well, we define cult starting with the leadership. The leader exercises or has total control over the lives of the members. The leader makes very detailed decisions about the personal lives of individuals. If they go to school, if they have sex, if they don't have sex, who they have sex with, things like that. The second criteria would be they use deception or lies for purposes of recruiting and for raising money. Thirdly, the group has practices that sort of force a rapid change in values, personality, and outlook of the members.
Now, Lori, you were in a cult for 9 years. Can you understand what happened at Heaven's Gate, where people actually committed suicide? Is that something you can relate to?
Well, unfortunately, and scary as it is, absolutely I can. And part of the reason why I can is because while I was in the cult, I was about 20 years old, I was told to marry a guy who I didn't know, I didn't like, I thought he was pretty weird. And I did it because I thought that I had no choice. I thought that the people who were in charge of me knew what was best for me, and therefore I married him. So when I think about Waco, when I think about Heaven's Gate, I think, well, gee, if I was in a position where somebody was saying, well, you need to commit suicide so that you can go ride on a UFO and go back to heaven or whatever, I hate to think that I might have done it, but the influence is so insidious and subtle that I probably would have.
Let's take it one step at a time. You married somebody who at that time you felt you didn't even like, no less loved.
No, I didn't love him, and I didn't really know him. We weren't allowed to get to know each other, but the marriage was for convenience, really. I was supposed to just be a submissive person and do what I was told, and so yes, I did marry him, and I didn't ever love him, and we were basically like brothers and sisters.
But in that group, women have a very special kind of position, if you want to call it special. I mean, they certainly have a very second-rate position. Maybe you want to say something about that.
That's the Hare Krishna group.
Yes, they're considered half as intelligent as men. Their position is very, very low. They're considered to have the mentality of a 12-year-old. They even say that their brain is half the size of a man's brain. They're supposed to be submissive. A man's job, a husband's job is basically to provide his wife with saris, you know, the garb of the Indian Hindu caste, and jewelry and children. And that will make a woman happy.
Well, did you raise a family within the cult?
I had 3 children when I was there, yes.
And how long did you stay in the cult?
I was there for 9 years total. I was married for 7 years, and I had my first child shortly after I got married.
What occurred for you to say, this is not what I want?
Well, I think it was my maternal instincts, because at a point that my oldest daughter was age 5, they wanted me to send her away to the schools. I had seen abuse as a result of some of the schools, both sexual and physical, and I was very concerned about sending my daughter away. I didn't think that it was the right thing to do. I sort of got kicked around a little bit and sort of abused, I think, and I was had 2 kids at the time, and I was pregnant with my 3rd. I found myself homeless, and a little bit of logic entered my brain at that point, and I thought, well, gee, these people claim to be the most compassionate people in the universe. I'm one of them, and they treated me like this, so there's something really wrong here. So that, coupled with the fact that I was supposed to send my daughter away, gave me a big, big kick in the pants, and I went through a very, very, very difficult and long process of going through trying to decide how I could get out, you know, with a lot of fear of going to hell, of damnation, of death, of taking my children to hell with me. But it was really those 2 things, I think, that kicked me in the butt.
Arnold, what type of individual is susceptible to join a cult?
Everyday individuals the kids who live next door, the people you went to school with, the people your children go to school with. There is no particular type of person who gets involved in the cult except to say they tend to be people who are somewhat idealistic, maybe oftentimes a young person who's looking for greater meaning or a sense of purpose in their lives. Also, there are people who have a yearning for spirituality, those who move towards the spiritually oriented kinds of groups. But these are everyday attributes of regular folks.
Yes, but the way you described it before, it's almost like you're looking for an authority figure to tell you what to do and to lead, how to lead the best life.
The problem with your premise is that you're not allowing for the aggressive recruitment that is done by the cult that really hooks into these common human needs. I don't know so much that people are looking. I mean, the stories that I've heard, the people I know didn't, look up in the book and say, how do I go join the group? They may have had a vulnerability. They may have, as I've described, they may have had certain human needs, or they may have been going through a crisis. I mean, there are people who were going through difficult times in their lives. We know that oftentimes people join cults sometime within a year and a half after some sort of life setback. But aside from that, it's the aggressiveness and the sophistication of the recruiting techniques, the thought reform program that they use, the isolating the person from the rest of society, from the family. That's the issue here. It's how they go about it, that deception, those lies. I mean, here's a group of people who presented themselves as the most holy, the most spiritual, and going to show, Laurie how to live this wonderful life of spirituality. Well, they don't sound too evolved to me when she talks about sexual abuse and child abuse and homelessness.
And, also, I've always, one of the reasons why I'm public about my experience is because I think I'm a fairly intelligent person. I graduated from an Ivy League university, and I'm relatively normal, whatever that is, but I really am a relatively normal person. But I happened to be at a distressed time of my life. I am very idealistic still to this day. I wasn't necessarily looking for answers, but answers were sort of dropped in my lap, and I was led by the nose into a situation. I didn't know what I was getting into until I was there. And then once I was there, I didn't know how to get out.
Tell us a little about your background. What type of religion are you?
I was raised in an Episcopal church, not very strong, but we went to church most Sundays. I went through communion. I had a pretty good upbringing in the church and read the Bible, and wasn't really dissatisfied with the religion, but I didn't even consider myself at that point spiritual.
And how were you recruited?
It was very simple. Somebody came up to me at a fair and gave me some incense. She was very, very sweet, very charismatic, very loving to me. Said, can you give some change, give some money? I gave her some money. She gave me a book. She invited me to come and visit her. It felt like a very personal gift of the book. It felt like a personal invitation for me to come and see her. I might be making a new friend. I was very attracted to her. She had a lot of charisma. So I went to visit her. She wasn't there when I went, but then when I went, there were a whole bunch of other people there who came and said, well, here, let us talk to you, let us give you some food, this is our family, this is what we do, this is how you can have happiness, eternal happiness, this is how you can have harmony in your life, you can have peace, this is where you'll get the real education.
I mean, it sounds wonderful. They're saying, come with me and you'll be happy for the rest of your life.
Right.
Who wouldn't want that?
Right. Well, that's what, when I work with people, young people especially, I find that they're very intelligent, and one of the things that comes out in the counseling sessions that I go work through is that they're really looking for happiness. They want to find happiness, bliss, some way to have really intense self-realization about spirituality and about themselves in relation to spirituality. So it's really a yearning for happiness.
Okay, they preach happiness, but what actually is delivered?
Well, I think torment and torture, I think slavery, obedience to the leader, and mostly giving up your own will. The most extreme case that we have is the Heaven's Gate group. I mean, you could see that these people had totally lost their will to live and their ability to make any decisions on their own. So they didn't have any judgment or critical thinking.
But Arnold, I saw that film, I saw the VCR tape of the people before they were about to commit suicide. They didn't seem tormented. They certainly didn't seem tortured. They appeared that they knew exactly what they were doing, and as far as they were concerned, they were going to someplace as opposed to leaving someplace.
But it's funny you say that you see it before they did it, but it's after many years of the indoctrination of a closed-off group following this leader who they believe is godlike or God-sent. Also, you have the other aspect is you have the group psychology. When you have a group of people living away from society, I mean, they may physically be there, but without any input from society, the group think takes over. So the group then develops its own norms and its own beliefs. So the usual life force of wanting to live goes out the window. Now, my impression of those videos, if you notice, it's very characteristic of long-term cult group members. Those people, while being probably in their 40s or late 20s or 30s, were very childlike. They seemed to be absolutely silly. They were giddy, they were childlike. They also seemed to be quite dissociated from their bodies. Well, now we know about the castrations. At the time I saw that, I said they seemed to be disconnected from their bodies, just the way they were looking. They did seem to be strange, somewhat strange and maybe odd as people. They referred to thanking the father. One fellow says, "I thank my father," and so on. Well, it wasn't referring to his biological father, referring to the father doe. So you have this transition, this moving the person from the connection to their biological family, the emotional and psychological severing of ties from the biological family, moving it to the leader. They are totally obedient and believe that leader to be their father, their spiritual father, their total and important father and leader.
Now, Lori, as you see, sex seems to play a significant part in cults, whether it's the absence of sex or they tell you who to have sex with or having sex with the leaders. What has been your experience on this?
Well, my own personal experience is that celibacy was demanded of you. Even in marriage, when you were married, you were allowed to have sex to procreate. So you were allowed to have sex once a month when the woman was the most fertile, and only if you wanted to have a child. So I can count on my hands the number of times that I had sex with my husband in 7 years of marriage. I happened to be very fertile, and I knew when I would get pregnant. I also find that cults, you know, one of the things about the control of sexuality is if you control a person's sexuality, you really control the person. And so that control of saying you can't have sex or you must have sex with so-and-so or you must have sex every night with a different person is a total control of the person. It's really a way to keep the person. And also, in terms of what Arnie was saying, you said that the tape of Heaven's Gate, that they didn't look tormented, they, you know, probably looked sort of happy and okay. You know, when you're in a cult situation, you don't feel. You learn how to not feel. You learn how to not have any emotion. You learn how to turn off your intellectual progress. When I left the cult, I was 27. Emotionally and intellectually, I was about 19. I really didn't know how to function in the real world. And it wasn't just, part of it was my alienation and my isolation from the real world, but also it was because I didn't grow. I didn't really know what happiness was. My happiness was very limited to the way that the group was presenting what happiness was. And happiness really had to do with spirituality. The more spiritual, the more surrendered you were to your leader, then therefore the more happy you should be. But these people don't know what happiness really is because they're not feeling it.
Now, Arnie brought up the point about parents and relatives. Well, how did you manage your parents, your relatives? I mean, how did that work out for yourself?
Well, I tried to stay in contact with my family. I have a very big family in terms of cousins and aunts and uncles, so I lost contact with all of my extended family. My mother and father I kept in contact with and sort of had a falling out back and forth with my father, but it was very limited. It was controlled. I wasn't allowed to see them at times when I really needed to see them for some family problem that they requested me to be there. So it was very, very controlled. I lost contact with all friends that I had.
Excuse me, it was controlled by others.
By others.
You had to tell them, you had to get permission to see them. See, that's the point. I mean, the cult member does not have the freedom to decide, like, you know, to call home or to go visit the family if there's an illness or somebody dies. I mean, they have to check it out first. They don't have
they're not allowed to. And if you're allowed to, you have to take another cult member with you.
Right.
It almost seems as I don't want to use the term dictatorship.
It is.
But of
It's
the
totalitarianism, absolutely.
It's totalitarianism.
It's the model that's
leader.
used, right.
Yeah.
And it's almost of a mindset that people will allow themselves to be part of this.
Well, there's the question.
There's the subtleties of it.
Is it allowed, or are we talking about a totalitarian system that uses thought reform which in prisoner of war camps we talk about brainwashing. I mean, we know that works. And that's the analogy here. So they're using a brainwashing or a thought reform program that enables the person doing this to take control of the life of another.
We can continue this conversation
Okay.
right after this break. I'm Alan Schnorman, your host. You're watching Lawline. Stay with us. Hello, I'm Alan Schnorman, the host of Lawline, and I want to give you some important information about your legal rights. If you were seriously injured in an automobile, a fall down, or construction accident, you may be entitled to a substantial money award for your pain and suffering. It is important to speak to a knowledgeable attorney in that field. At my firm, Solomon & Schnorman, our practice is limited to personal injury law. We fight for the rights of accident victims. Don't try to evaluate the case yourself. If you have any questions about your accident, call us at 1-800-LAWLINE. If you're too injured to come to our office, we will come to you. The consultation is free, and we only get paid when your case is settled or won. Remember, the insurance companies have lawyers protecting their interests, and so should you. Hello, you're watching Lawline. We're discussing the mystique of cults. Our guests are Arnold Markowitz of the Cult Hotline from the Jewish Board of Family Services, and also Lori Schaffler, a former member of the Hare Krishna cult. Lori, now I know you were married in the cult. You had 3 children. Mm-hmm. After 9 years, you decided to leave. Did you leave with the children?
Yes, I did.
And your husband, did he leave with you?
No, he's still a member.
He's still a member.
Yes,
What about support? Did you get support from the children?
Absolutely no child support whatsoever. Not a penny.
Well, did you go to court to ask for child support?
Yes, I did. I was awarded on the divorce decree $300 a month for the 3 children, which he, of course, he never paid. He left the country so he could avoid paying child support, and basically have heard from him once since then, and he has his take on it is, I'm a poor man, I'm not a materialistic person, I have no money, I can't help to support these children.
How do the Hare Krishna, the cults you were in, how do they support themselves? They had to pay rent, they have to do everything that people do.
Well, they have a lot of book selling, they send their people, I used to go out on the street and sell books, flowers, proselytize, solicit tons of money. My quota for the day was at least $150. If I didn't come, I used to come home with at least $200, $250 6 days a week. And we were taught tactics at that time on how to trick people out of money. The way that we were told to do this was that the more money that we got from people, the better off they would be, because they couldn't engage in as much sense gratification. Therefore, they would become more purified because they would become more spiritual. By giving money to us, they were giving it to God, and therefore they were more spiritual. We were taught very, very sleazy tactics of saying to, especially men, the girls would go and talk to men saying, I have a bunch of ones in my bag. Can you give me a big bill? Do you have a 50? And I'll give you some of my ones. I just don't like carrying them around. They'd give you 50, and well, lo and behold, there are no ones in the bag. So you maybe have 5. You give back 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, you could leave. In the meantime, you're giving books. Oh, you could leave it at that. This is really for a good cause. And guess what? A lot of times they did.
What happens if you didn't make your quota?
Well, I started not making my quota, and then they made me get married. That was my...
To go back to the money, you have to imagine that, and particularly when Lori was in, there were probably thousands of people out there on the street bringing in hundreds of dollars a day. Some people more money than Lori, some people less. And all this is cash money. I've known of people, former members or whatever, who report, being in the room where the money's counted. They just have a money counter with stacks. It was described as stacks of money, like file case high, like 4 or 5 feet of I don't know if you've ever seen, just bills stacked the entire room. I don't know if they banked it, whatever they did, but
they bought
kept
property,
this cash.
a lot of property.
They bought a lot of property. The other point that I think that we want to point out about the lawlessness of these groups, because they believe that they have the right to live above the law. So Lori's husband is ordered to provide child support, send them out of the country. They have places all over the world. So they avoid, doing what they're supposed to, and they help the members living up to, to their responsibilities. So they move people around, they put them underground, they take them out of the country. This is done on a regular basis.
Now, cults seem to, every once in a while, come to the front of the stage like they are today with Heaven's Gate, and then they go back to the backstage, and then all of a sudden you have, like we had Jonestown, we had Waco. How pervasive are cults now in the United States? That's your field.
Yeah.
How bad is it?
I think the reality is that the cults don't change a great deal. I think our news coverage does. I mean, obviously there are, horrific events that occur like Heaven's Gate and, Waco and so forth. But I think that the membership lately in the last many years has been quite steady. I think that there was a big blip in the very beginning. People were quite shocked and amazed, and possibly there were more people involved at that time, through the 70s and early 80s. But I think since the mid-80s, the number of cults and people involved out there seems to be consistent. Old cults seem to change a little bit, but they're out there. New cults are developing all the time. They embrace the new philosophy, or now embrace the computer age. Now you hear about computer cults.
Laurie, now, look, it's years later. You're looking back to those 9 years that you were in the cult. What's your impression? What's your feeling regarding those 9 years?
Well, I can't look at it as a complete mistake because I have 3 beautiful children as a result of it. I also think that I learned a lot of things about myself, in retrospect. But if I had to do it again, I surely wouldn't have done it. I think that it was really unfortunate. I think that I lost a lot of time. I didn't go to college. I had to really do a lot of catching up to put everything back together. And I feel that I'm very lucky. I think it's very, very hard for people who get involved in cults, because what happens is that you're doing something pure, clean, idealistic. It's not drugs, it's not crime, it's not alcohol, and you find out that it's bad and it's destructive, and it's very hard to commit yourself to anything after that.
Your child comes home, Laurie, and says, "Mom, I'm joining a cult." What do you do?
I do everything possible. First of all, my first thing would be to take my child away and go through, and I probably would go to a professional, because this is my child and I cannot be neutral about it. Yeah, a psychologist or a therapist. I would call Arnie.
A clinical social worker? Yeah.
I would do whatever I could in terms of, there are a lot of...
I don't want to do it, Mom. Go joining this cult. They're offering me happiness. I know it. They're good people. What do you say?
Would you like to meet someone who's been to that group? There must be other information that you don't know. I'm sure that it feels good. Let's talk to some other people. You're not the first. You're not the only one. Can you be open-minded?
They've told me not even to pay attention to you.
Well, then you have a big problem, because you're going in with a closed mind and you need information. At least if you want to go and do something like that, you go in with information.
They've told me this is exactly what you would say to me.
Listen, if you're so sure of your beliefs, what's the harm in meeting with someone who knows whatever it is that your group believes, and you can dialogue with them? Convince us. Fine. The interesting thing I want to point out, whenever these, we call them exit counseling sessions are set up, what fascinates me, and I can't tell you that, I can explain why, very rarely does the cult member refuse to do it. I don't mean they call them up on the phone and say, "Come home, we're going to talk you out of the group." But if the person's there and the family presents it in the correct way, also you have to build some line of communication. They're agreeable. Usually they're there to, well, I'll do it because I'll show you that you, the parent, is wrong, that this is good.
Arnie, years ago you used to read about parents hiring someone to actually go in and, I guess, take the cult member against their will to an environment where they can discuss the issues with them.
Right.
Is that still done?
I don't think it's done very much, and we're totally against it. And I think that what we now know, that number one, that itself is a violent episode, would tend to turn, particularly a 20-something or a teenage child or older, against the parents for being so aggressive. And it turns out, at least from my perspective, that a well-reasoned negotiation, opening lines of communication, getting the agreement, sit down, listen to this person, whatever it takes, a day, 3 hours, 2 days, whatever, and then you will decide what to do. That kind of voluntary participation is just as good and works.
I would also like to say that as a member, that I was very, very stuck. I knew I was stuck on some subconscious level, and I used to pray that somebody would come and take me away. I called a priest one time and said, "Please help me. I've joined the Hare Krishnas. I think I'm doing the wrong thing." And he said, "Well, there are many paths to God. You happen to have chosen this one." Now, I wanted somebody to help me. My family couldn't help me. I didn't know where to go, and I was afraid to ask, because that was sort of my way of going to hell. If I go and ask somebody to help me, to convince me that what I'm doing is wrong, then that's really bad and I'm being influenced by demons and I would go to hell. But I wanted that to happen. I wanted to be helped.
So Lori brings up a good point here.
I just wanted information. I didn't have any information to use so that I could work with myself and battle
For
myself.
the 9 years you were a member of the cult, I assume there were periods that you were very happy.
Well, as I said, what was happiness? We weren't supposed to feel happiness. We were supposed to feel spirituality. So when I really try to think about happiness, sometimes I had elation because I thought that I was having some kind of spiritual bliss, but I don't really think of that as happiness. I had moments, of course, I had moments of when I had my children, I was happy, but I didn't feel free to let myself feel happy about those events.
In your particular instance, was there one person who told you what to do, or was it a group decision?
Well, I was all over the place, moved around, but usually it was the temple president who would tell you what to do, and then maybe have somebody who would be in charge. Well, for instance, he had a woman who was in charge of all the girls in one of the temples that I lived in. When I was married, I was supposed to follow my husband's orders, and he was supposed to follow the temple president's orders. So it was really sort of
So there's local leadership, yeah. Yeah, I just want to say something about the happiness. Just like the rest of us, cult members go through periods where they're happy and elated, but there are periods when they are down. Now, families who are in communication sometimes can figure this out, or you hope to be able to figure it out. And you sort of have to listen to those times if you have contact where you think things aren't going so well. That's probably your moment of opportunity to invite them to talk to someone about it. It's very hard, it's a little bit magical, but they do go through ups and downs.
Arnie, if I'm a parent and I think my child's in a cult or going into a cult, or I'm a member of a cult and I want more information, how do they contact your organization?
Well, they call us at the Cult Hotline and Clinic, which is operated by the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services, at the 632-4640, that's 212. And we would set up a counseling session or appointment with the family or with the cult member.
Give me that number again.
212-632-4640.
Now, who do they ask for?
Well, they will get, usually they'll get a receptionist or they'll get a social worker. Our staff consists of clinical social workers who are trained and knowledgeable.
I don't have to give you my
cultists.
name or anything. I could just seek information.
Well, if you want just information, we can talk to you on the phone, so you probably don't need your name, but if you wanted to really do something more substantial, you'd have to come in and presumably, people don't seem to be afraid to give their names. That does not seem to be the issue. But when they come in, we can help with information, guidance, and help families decide on a course of action.
Lori, what would be your advice to parents or members of cults or people who want thinking of joining a cult? What's your advice to them?
Well, my advice is to get in touch with an organization like Arnie's. I actually have a lot of referrals through Arnie's organization. What will happen is a parent will call his office and they have permission to give my number out, so then the parent or mostly it's parents will call me and say, well, I have this problem, my kid's involved in a cult or is thinking about joining a cult. Usually it's Eastern-based, Hare Krishna often, and I'll set up a time when I can go and sit with the person, the family. Often I've spent up to 10 hours sitting with a person and just providing information, not to tell them what to do or what not to do, but to provide information.
Lori Schaffler, thank you very much for appearing on Online. Arnie Markowitz from the Jewish Board of
Family and Children's Services.
Thank you once again for appearing on Lawline, and as always, this is Alan Stormer. Thank you for watching Lawline.
You have been watching Lawline with your host, New York trial attorney Alan Storman. Mr. Storman will be back with you next week at the same time. If you have any questions about this week's program, please write to Lawline, 63 Wall Street, New York, New York, 10005, or call area code 212-432-9111. Welcome to Lawline with your host, Alan Storman. Mr. Storman is a distinguished trial attorney, author, and lecturer. Each week, Lawline will bring you the most knowledgeable experts in the field of law today. And now, we introduce our guests and our host, Alan Storman.
Welcome to Lawline. Most trial attorneys will agree that the makeup of a jury is one of the most important. Obviously, you're not ready for me. Welcome to Lawline. Most trial attorneys will agree that the makeup of the jury is one of the most important factors in determining the outcome of their case. With the court's recent elimination of the jury duty exemptions, we are now seeing lawyers, doctors, even judges amongst those sitting on juries. Today we'll find out what effect this new jury pool has had on negligence verdicts. Our guests are the Honorable Walter Tollip, Acting Supreme Court Justice, New York County, and Ivan Schneider, a personal injury attorney whose firm holds 7 out of 10 of the state's highest verdicts on record. Hello, Judge Tollip.
Good evening.
Hello, Ivan. Okay, Ivan, tell us, how important is the jury selection in your cases?
It's the whole thing. When you walk in and you get a panel, that's determined the event of your case. You may be a good lawyer or a bad lawyer, you may bring down a verdict or raise the verdict, but the panel that you get will determine the end, no matter what you do.